Welcome to Camp Podcast Piano Talk. I am pianist Eunmi Ko, and I serve as president of the Contemporary Art Music Project, or CAMP. CAMP is an organization that promotes innovative art music and collaborates with composers and performing artists. One of many activities we do is our podcast series. Our hosts explore a wide range of topics from marginalized composers and music history to current collaborations. I am excited to announce that as our podcast continues to explore different topics, we have decided to consolidate our podcast series into one. Please make sure you're subscribed to Camp Podcasts to enjoy Lost to Time, Play the Ink, Piano Talk, Camp Podcast Special Edition, and more. Tonight, I am your host, and I am thrilled to talk with pianist composer Hwaen Ch'uqi. True talent, a genius diamond that you so rarely see by St. Petersburg Times, which I totally agree with. Concertizing throughout Americas, Europe, and Asia, an Inca Indian and a native of Peru, pianist and composer Hwaen Ch'uqi is a world-renowned soloist, recitalist, chamber musician, and composer. Hi, Hwan. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh, it's good to be here. I'm excited to chit chat about piano and music for a while.
Great, thank you. That's what we do here. So we usually start with background question. You know how you encounter with art music, and what's your drama with your you know
Yes,
your your first encounter with your music. Yeah.
yes, and I think it's safe to say it's quite dramatic. Uh, and so for me, there's the issue of my first encounters with music, and then there's the issue of my first encounter with classical music. And
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
think it's important to talk about both of them because my original or initial experiences with music really had a huge impact on how I received classical music then. So I grew up for the first 5 years of my life in Peru, and uh, I did hear music there, and it was very traditional Inca music. And I think there are a couple of things that I always associate with Inca music, and I'm sure other people in other, let's say, folk traditions can say similar things. Um, but I would say the two things, one is oral and one is visual, for lack of a better word. Um, the oral experience is that the music, by and large, is very what we would call pentatonic. Of course, pentatonic can mean a lot more than what we usually think of it as, but now I'm speaking of it in the pretty traditional sense of pentatonicism, and in that understanding of pentatonic scales, there is no half step, and for that
Mm-hmm.
matter,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like maybe one. There might be one whole step, but yeah, there's no half steps.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes very important as this goes along. The other aspect of things is more, as I would say, visual, although it has a very oral component to it. Um, but that is that you know, Inca music is it's a very communal experience, right? There are a lot of people standing around with their different instruments, whether it's the high flutes or the high guitars we call charangos and other things. Uh, and they're all playing different lines, if you will, different parts that then contribute to this big sound that is the music. So I took that sort of those predispositions, those understandings with me when I came to the US and heard music for the first time. The first piece of music, if you will, that I ever heard came out of a music box, and it was playing Hickory Dickory Dock, and nice little piece. And if you know the tune, you can't get two notes into it before you hit your first semitone motion, and that was wild for me.
Mm.
I I couldn't understand it, and it just didn't make sense to me. But I loved it, um, and I should interject at this point that I would describe most Inca music as fairly sad or bittersweet in sound, and they managed to do it with, like I said, no semitone motions in the tunes. And so when I heard the semitone for the first time, I to me it was like the saddest thing I ever heard.
Mm. Mm.
Um, so I've always sort of carried that with me, that this motion of the semitone has this extremely bittersweet quality to it, even when the music is obviously very happy. And then the first piece of classical music I heard was Brahms' second piano concerto,
Mhm.
which, for a 5-year old to hear, a 5, 6-year old, I think most people would say, oh, that's too young to really understand what's going on there. And I found in my situation that was not the case, partly because I went through some pretty uh, traumatic experiences in Peru that thankfully most people don't have to experience. But I think that it prepares you for some of the deep emotions that you get in very complex romantic music like that. But it opens with this French horn melody, and again, you get to the fourth note, and there's your first semitone motion, and I just immediately, uh, brought to that understanding some very, very bittersweet aspect to it. And then the next thing that happens is the piano. You hear the piano at the very low end of the instrument, and that was pretty wild for me because again, we didn't have sounds that low uh,
Mm.
in the Inca music that I knew. So, uh, and then you have this piano cadenza, right? Which in itself is kind of amazing
Mm.
from a historical
Mhm.
perspective. Uh, but the piano is just all over the place. And
Mhm. Mhm.
I was just listening to a recording, so I didn't understand yet that that was one person doing all of this. So
Mhm.
I, in my natural way of con- conceiving music at that time, I just assumed it was a whole bunch of people, let's say holding different instruments. Uh, they were the same type of instrument, but different ranges, different,
Mhm.
yeah. And they were all playing their parts, their voices. And I was amazed, like, oh, how did they coordinate all of that to sound so unified and so, extraordinary. But it took a quite a while before I came to realize, no, that was one person doing all of that, and that's the capability of that instrument called the piano. But I carried uh, this, I guess, habit of breaking things down into lines and registers and things, as I had always done in Peru. I carried that into uh, all classical music. When you're listening to an orchestra, that makes sense. Um, but I did it for all piano music too, and so that tendency has has been the way that I have listened to, uh, memorized, performed, and composed music. So it's had a very enormous impact on just the way that I deliver music to other people.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I remember my own name when I was 5. So it's amazing. And also, it's like how people um, have this kind of personal memory about, very specific elements of music. It could be like for you, it's like semitone. For somebody else, it could be like some segments of a piece, and or it can be really anything. It's really magical.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's also really interesting thinking about. Um, I don't know anything about Inca music, but different kinds of music, and I also think about the music in Korea, ancient times, and Middle Age, and 17th, 19th century music. That's when I had very little interest when I was younger about that, and now I listen to those music. It's that music. It's really amazes me. It's like the most beautiful thing to me. And how your perception changes over the time. That's also amazing too,
Hmm.
right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, it's and I think that's like why you're playing, and your interpretation is so original and unique of whatever you play, like Brahms, Galati, or Mozart, Bach. That's was one thing that I admire so much about you, that it's just so original, so sincere, really touching performance.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I feel like I'm lucky in a way to have had a time in my life when there was a vacuum, when I didn't know classical music. I mean, I knew music, but not classical
Mhm.
music.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I feel really lucky about that, because even though I'm much, much older now and I've been playing forever, it seems like, I still feel like, as we say, a kid in a candy store. When I look at a score for the first time of a piece I haven't learned yet, but it's a piece that we all know. We've heard these pieces to death, right? A lot of them. But just looking at a score and seeing, oh my goodness, here's a voice that I haven't heard anyone
Mm.
bring out. Uh,
Mm.
and so I just get excited about that, and I feel like I'm maybe maybe from let's say like a historical performance perspective, I'm rediscovering things that, if you listen to recordings from 80, 90, 100 years ago, you might hear more of this kind of discovery and exploration. But for me, it's all brand new, and I love it. One of the things that I think, um, when I look through a score, uh, I I'm kind of guilty, I admit it, of not paying attention to a lot of performance indications like dynamics and articulations and pedal marks and things like that, because I'm so focused on the pitches and the rhythms. Uh,
Mm, mm,
and I'm just so convinced that between the pitches and the rhythms, they they almost tell you how to play the piece, so that a lot of the performance indications that we do see aren't necessary. Uh, that's not always the case, obviously, um, but quite often. I mean, if you look at, let's say a Beethoven score, right, and we see lots of sforzandos in Beethoven scores. Uh, Most of the time, you already know to do that, even if that sforzando wasn't there, because they emphasize syncopations. They emphasize, uh, let's say, chords with a minor ninth, which again is that semitone again, right? I mean, that's basically what's going on there. And so, yeah, they emphasize these things that are so unusual in the music. Um, but I just think that musically, where I came from, has had such a great influence on the way that I look at pieces that don't belong to my culture, my original culture, but bring, I guess, a sort of fresh, I wouldn't say new, but definitely fresh perspective to it.
no, it's amazing. I mean, it's to me, it's like you make this a really unexpected turn and makes the piece totally new. So let's listen to your performance of Brahms Opus 118, number 2, which is one of the most popular pieces. And let's enjoy that how unique and original this piece could be just by a performance. Was Brahms' Opus 118 number 2 performed here by Hwaen Ch'uqi? You wear so many different hats. You know, you are obviously the renowned soloist, um, and chamber musician, and also a composer. And um, how do you manage being, you know, so many awesome things?
I wish I could manage it better, honestly. And that's, I think I've probably talked to you about this, but I definitely have complained to other people that I wish I look at somebody like Bernstein. It's one of my idols, you know, and conductor, pianist, composer, and educator, right? I mean, just the amount of
Hmm.
things he did,
Hmm.
and I'm sure that he didn't just exclusively do one thing for a stretch and then move on to something else. Unfortunately, that's 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 the way that I work. So you know, if I am preparing for concerts, I can't be composing, and if I'm composing, I can't be preparing for concerts. And the problem is even worse than that. Honestly, I I don't know. I guess I have. What do they call that, tunnel vision, when you only could see one thing at a time, you know. So it's like, so you know, this year, for example, was the first year that I had several like parallel commissions going on at the same time, and I have to say it was freaking me out because I'm so used to just writing one thing at a time. And but yeah, this time there were competing deadlines, and it was rough. uh, Out of my headspace for this thing and move to a headspace for that thing. And I wish I had a way of being efficient about that, but I don't. So to answer your question, I'm very fortunate in that I sleep very little, as you know. I, I can, you know, I do very well on 4 hours a night. And as a result, I have more time. And that's what I need. I don't know what I would do if I were a normal human being who needed 8, 10, 12 hours. I wouldn't get anything done. So,
Well, that's, I mean, you know, as a being, normal human being, I don't get much done. So, you know, you also have this piano ensemble piece, and your own composition and your duo partner, which just, it's so amazing. And uh, can we listen to the piece and talk about the piece maybe?
sure,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
let's listen to Suite in the Baroque manner for two pianos. We're gonna listen to the last movement jig. Suite in the Baroque manner for two pianos, Jig, the last movement, um, by Hwaen Ch'uqi, performed here by Hwaen Ch'uqi and Emi Okumura. So tell us about this piece and what was the your inspiration writing this piece?
Yes, so actually, one of the reasons I started composing anyway a number of years ago was to basically give myself more concerts. I figured out if I composed things that people liked and then I put a piano part in there, then I had to play too. So it was very beneficial in that way. And so early on, I started writing things for either piano four hands or two pianos. And one of the first things that I started writing was I actually wrote. It's interesting you played the jig because the first thing that I wrote of this suite was the opening subject, fugue subject
Mm,
from the jig, and I wrote that at a time when I was just beginning to compose, and I had these grand ideas about all these things I wanted to do. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to really dig into, explore the Bach orchestral suites.
mm,
Culturally, I think we're familiar with a couple bits here and there, right? Like the air on the G string, you hear it every wedding and things like that. But those suites are so rich and they're so full of uh, different kinds of music, uh, just different varieties of sounds. And from the orchestral point of view, he does some pretty fantastic uh, orchestration that I don't think get pointed out very often. And so I was really intrigued by those, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to write something that was like an orchestral suite, but for pianos? So I decided to do that, and I wrote that subject for the jig, and then I couldn't write anything else. I couldn't think of what to do next. So it sat there for I think it sat there for I don't know 14, 15 years, something like that. Uh, and so I this year I got a commission from MTNA and New York State Music Teachers Association to write something, and I thought, what the heck,
mhm,
I'm getting paid. I might as well finish this.
mhm,
And so I wrote this suite, and it really it takes a lot of its inspiration from particularly the third and fourth orchestral suites of Bach, especially the fourth suite. It begins with the typical overture, and as you know, that kind of overture, French overture, has the slow, stately beginning, and then you've got the
yeah.
faster fugue. And the cool thing about that overture in the Bach fourth suite, most fugues in French overtures are in they're either in 6/8 or like a fast 4/4, something like this. But this one was in 9/8. And because of that, he does some amazing things that even two pianos couldn't do. But he has all these echo effects and things like that that he does. And I just got so excited by that. So I decided to write my fugue also in 9/8 in the overture. Then the second movement is an air, similar to the kind of thing that we're used to, right? The air and the G string.
Mhm,
And that also, to for in full disclosure, I wrote was very much inspired by Emmy herself. She is, a very darling human being, and there's a certain sort of lyricism that she has when she plays that I
mhm,
that I really love. And since I knew that Emmy and I were going to be starting a duo, I really wrote this piece for us specifically to play, and that movement in particular to kind of show her off. Um, then you have your pairs of dances, right? The gavottes and the minuets, and then the jig that we heard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one thing about this jig, uh, where I sort of put my own touch on things, is that at the end of the jig, you get the slow part of the overture uh, as the final, clincher of the whole thing. So in a weird sort of way, uh, the whole suite then becomes sort of like a French overture, right? Where you start with the French overture, the slow bits, and you go through all this other stuff, and finally after the jig, you come back once again to uh, that stately part of the French overture. So it's sort of you can almost think of it as an overture within an overture kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of proud of that little touch, I'll have to say.
Cool. Yeah. I'd like to actually continue talking about, you mentioned about the your partner Amy Okumura and reflecting her playing and personally taking that as kind of inspiration for composition. And you have this piano solo piano work that's inspired by Inca music, and also it's dedicated to this performer Kimball Gallagher. So I think we can probably talk about that, and your um, kind of take on this early choral music, early Inca choral music, and also this particular performer, Kimball Gallagher.
Yeah, so Kimball is a wonderful pianist. He has big hands. I think he can reach like a 12th. It's frustrating. Uh, but I say that because he commissioned this piece. It's also another suite, and and I try as much as I can to, write to the specific strengths of people who ask for things. So there are a number of 11ths uh, in the piece, and I think in the movement that we will hear, if you listen very carefully, you might hear uh, a couple of those as well. But Kimball is also he's very special to me in a very different kind of way. Um, he has a way of getting me to do things that I normally wouldn't do, especially in the musical realm. And this piece is a very good example of that. Um, until I wrote this piece, actually, I wanted nothing to do with writing music that had any sort of Inca influence. Besides, the influence that I already talked about, where the contrapuntal thing and the that sort of thing, but more, I think, influence in the way that people generally think about, cultures sort of uh, uh, melding, mixing with each other. I really didn't want to do that because, I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this too. Inca music speaks to a part of my heart that
Hmm.
nothing else does. And it's really hard to describe. But when I try to play Inca melodies on the piano, I mean, it sounds awful to me. And so, I just swore I'm never going to do that. Uh, but Kimball was like, look, I want you to write this suite, and I wanted to reflect different countries that I have visited as a pianist. But I want you to include Peru in there because I visited, he visited Peru, and it has to be in there. Um, so I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I was grumbling and groaning, and as a result, it took much longer to write this piece. I think it took
Mm-hmm.
a couple years, but at some point, as I was trying to figure out what can I do, and I was doing a little bit of research, and I stumbled upon this song. Really, it's a hymn that is found in a very early Catholic hymnal
Mm-hmm.
of Peru from back in I think the 1620s, and the tune is called Hanacpachap Cussicuinin, and it's meant as a processional, so which means that the priests are supposed to walk very slowly up
Mm.
to the front as this is going on. When I heard this tune, I seriously just broke down crying because it really was I think a very genuine kind of almost I would say accidental mixing
Mm.
of the two cultures where the tune itself clearly has Inca overtones.
Mm.
There's no way to avoid that. It's absolutely Inca sort of inspired, let's say, and the language is the Inca language. Uh, but the harmonies are, I would say, very, let's say, high Renaissance European
Mm-hmm.
harmonies. But it works so beautifully together. And we can have arguments some other time about, is this right? That these people who came in and destroyed Peru and they did all this, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
this music. I don't know. I that's for different people to discuss. But the product was absolutely stunning to me. And when I heard that, I thought this is something I can use.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to use that melody and also actually as you hear in the recording, the drum. I decided to use that and made basically a fantasy uh, on that tune. Um, and that's what opens the suite. And it also comes back in the last movement, which is also about Peru. It's sort of about someone's when they see the destruction that happened in Peru. But at the very end of that movement, that theme comes back in just a snippet of it, enough to be recognizable. But so Kimball, again, he was the one who moved me from never wanting to put Inca music in in piano music to getting me to a place where I would consider that. And as a result, I've actually done it a couple more times, not so directly with melodies like this, but with at least subject matter that has to do with Inca material.
Cool. Well, let's listen to Hanacpachap Cussicuinin, performed here by Ensemble Villancico, and we'll listen to the first movement from Faded Leaves, which was inspired by this music and composed by Hwaen Ch'uqi, and of course performed here by Kimball Gallagher. It was Hanacpachap Cussicuinin, performed by Ensemble Villancico, and first movement from Faded Leaves by Hwaen Ch'uqi, performed by Kimball Gallagher. For me, this is all about discovering um, that you run into difficulties, you run into frustration, you run into all kinds of suffering and pain, and you discover music. You discover something new, and then you turn that into um, you know, s- turn that into a form of art. It's amazing, really. And, if you can share your wisdom with our audience about um, being an artist and being creative, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I I guess what I would say is go back, go back to the basics, right? I think sometimes and I understand. I mean, especially in our, uh, Western classical culture, it's like 1,000 years old now, and so it's, when we try to come up with something new, whether it's an interpretation or a compositional technique or something, I think sometimes we can feel weighed down, right, by all this history and like what possibly new can we do? I
Mm-hmm,
mean, they've
mm-hmm,
done it all, and it's true. I mean, if you look at history in a way, uh, there's kind of a cyclical aspect of things too. Anyway,
mm-hmm,
where Schoenberg wasn't the first person to go off the way he did. I mean, you look at Gesualdo, and he kind of did the same
mm-hmm,
thing, right? And so,
mm-hmm,
so yeah, you have these cycles, and I do take a measure of comfort, even just from observing those cycles. But I guess the two pieces of advice that I would say are: number one, strip all the decorations aside, and actually just go back to, if you're a composer, the pitches and the rhythms, or even a performer. Just go back to that and see what's actually going on and see what you can figure out before considering everything else that was written. And I just think, you'll discover things, as you said well, that you didn't see before and that a lot of people didn't see before. Um, I would say then the other thing is, once you start forming your interpretation or writing your piece, don't second guess yourself. That's a extremely easy thing to do. Um, especially from the composing side, it's easy to start writing something and say, "Oh, well, I think Xenakis did that already," or I recognize that little bit from Schumann, or Buxtehude or something, so I shouldn't use that. And if you keep doing that, you won't write anything. Um, and I think it's easy to forget that someone's voice consists of a lot of different things. Like what makes Schumann Schumann, or what makes Haydn Haydn. It isn't just one or two gestures that they used, or different cadences, or textures, or whatever. There's a whole, I don't know, toolbox that they used, uh, and the way they used it is different than the way someone else used it, even though they're using the same tools. And so I think once you consider get out of your own way and just keep writing, and maybe at the end of it you'll say, "Oh my goodness, that I'm not into that." But before you throw it out, try to figure out what it is about it that you don't like, because that very well may tell you, what to do later. But I find that all the time, and I would say too, even as an audience, let's say you're listening to a new piece. I have to say sometimes it's a little hard for me when I'm showing a new piece to somebody and they're like, "Oh, I hear Mozart there," It's like, "Oh, that's Rachmaninoff over here." And I'm like, "No, I took a lot of time to write this down and uh, listen to the whole thing, right? And figure out how it all works together because yeah, that little bit might sound like Rachmaninoff, but I guarantee you I didn't use it the way that he did because I couldn't. Um, but I think as an audience, if you can sort of really listen to something as if you're hearing it for the first time, which is actually a good thing to do even when you've heard something a billion times, uh, because you'll always find something new, something refreshing that you hadn't heard before, and frankly will probably move you, touch you in a way that you hadn't experienced before. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, yeah, I mean, I think every composer, every artist, every performing artist uh, has their own, and whatever they experience, it's in their music. Whether it's Rachmaninoff or Mozart, it's in there as their experience. So yeah, well, thank you so much and sharing, your music and your insights and wisdom with us. It's absolutely precious, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Support us by donating. You can go to our website www.contemporaryartmusicproject.org and simply click the donate button. Help us continue our podcast festival and other exciting projects. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time with more piano music.